all set so that we just bring it out, plug it in, and on Sunday, that was fine.
No,
It's done nothing since.
I tell you something. One reason I don't embed movies into it, you can see it, and before people come, it's all working.
Yes.
And then, why is that going into that side? Oh, that's interesting. I don't understand why that's happening.
No. I used to really worry about this because 12 months ago I handed that over to Martin. Oh, we're back. No? Oh, he's just checking the. Okay, he's checking the slideshows. He's trying to see if it'll come up there.
Oh, don't worry about it. Tell him it.
Nope. Yes, I know. I saw it. I know it won't. I witnessed it. I think if Andrew and the team can bear it, then we've got the first lot monitored here. Yeah. Okay. I see, yes. It will, yes. So you've got them on your phone?
Yeah.
Yes, he's got them on his phone, so yeah. Okay. No. Are you ready to go? Otherwise? Okay. Oh, okay. All right. When we want to. Okay, thank you. All right. Let's see you on the next side. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Adam Deere. I'm going to welcome you on behalf of St Andrews first. I'm a member of the congregation here. David Uffendale, our rector, can't be here this evening. He's having to do some family business. I'm going to hand over in a moment to Joseph from Farnham Baptist Church to introduce today's speakers, but if you'll bear with me, I'd just like to do a little bit of letting you know what facilities we have here. First, toilets. We do have toilets. On my right, your left, go into the side chapel, and the toilets are through there. Okay. Second is our emergency exits. Air steward bit now. They're at the back, on the sides there. The door you came in and the opposite side. Those are our emergency exits. And for our chairs, we do have some blankets. In the winter, they help to keep us warm. In the summer, they provide some comfort on the chairs. So if you'd like to use those, please, could we just ask if you can take them back, fold them up, put them back on the pile afterwards. We'd really appreciate that. We are recording this evening's event. Not planning to put any of you out in the audience on the camera, but we're recording this so that Andrew can look at putting that up to publish it later. So I'll just hope you enjoy this evening. I'm going to hand over now to Joseph, Assistant Minister at Farnham Baptist Church, to introduce the evening proper. Thanks, Joseph.
Thanks, Adam. Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you so much for being here. As mentioned, my name is Joseph, and I am the Assistant Minister or Pastor at Farnham Baptist Church, which is one of the churches here in town. And I have the privilege of saying a few words this evening to introduce our time together. Science. Now, faith and science are two of the biggest shapers in our world. These two fields have the biggest impacts upon people's thoughts, people's lives, people's ideas, and what people care about. As ideas have spread and grown along the long road of human history, the unfortunate situation has emerged whereby some feel that you can do both of these things together at the same time. By some, it is considered searching for proof, meaning, purpose. You must choose one or the other, faith in God or science. Meanwhile, some of you, including our speakers, will and that the more you dig and consider, the more you realize that faith and science harmoniously intertwine. And that is a harmony that expands as we learn more. Our event here, Andrew Scott. Andrew is a member of Farnham Baptist Church and a former deacon there. He is currently a distinguished research professor in the Department of Earth Sciences, Royal Holloway, University of London. He holds a bachelor's science in geology, a doctorate in paleobotany, and a doctorate in the evolution of terrestrial ecosystems. So I had to practice his biography there so I didn't trip over myself. London, and was a visiting professor at Yale University. He has written more than 250 scientific papers and 12 books, including some in popular science such as Burning Planet, The Story of Fire Through Time. He advises fire services and Parliament on wildfire, and is a regular radio contributor to programs such as In Our Time on BBC Radio 4, as well as a range of science programs across the world and on the World Service. And speakers respond to some of the questions you may ask. Before I continue, let me just finish my introduction with this. There is a tendency in our society to listen to the experts. And this often manifests in a seemingly natural conclusion such as, well, scientists say so, so it must be true. This can be posited as a rejection of faith-based claims. Well, today, here are, and they are scientists, but they are first Christians. And hopefully after this evening, you can reflect and consider a bit more when using the phrase, scientists say so, so it must be true. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you so much, Joseph, and welcome to you all. I'm really quite astounded we managed to get so many people. I just want to say one thing. We decided that the two speakers will speak, then we'll have a break where you can get tea, coffee, biscuits, and other nibbles, and that will be about 20 minutes. If after the talks you have a question you would like the panel to look at, please can you write it down and put it in the basket in front. We ask that so that we can get a good range of questions being asked that we can then discuss. So we'd be very grateful if you would do it that way. I want to just introduce our first speaker, and that's David Wilkinson. Now, David, you might have heard on Thought for the Day on Radio 4. David is a Methodist minister, but also an academic holding doctorates in both theoretical astrophysics and theology. He was principal of St. John's College, Durham University from 2006 to 2013, and is a professor in the Department of Theology and Religion. In 2023, he was appointed Director of Equipping Christian Leadership in an Age of Science, an international project based at St. John's College. In January 2024, he was installed as an ecumenical canon of Durham Cathedral. He is author of several books on the relationship between science and religion, such as God, Stephen Hawking and the Multiverse, When I Pray, What Does God Do? God, the Universe and Everything, 42 Days Through Faith and Pop Culture. And as I said, he is a regular guest on radio, including on Radio 4. So it is my huge pleasure to introduce to you, I ought to say just quickly, that all three of us got to know each other through a group called Christians in Science. And there are so many amazing scientists who are involved in that we could have this every year for the next 20 years, and you would hear so many amazing speakers. But anyway, I'll introduce and give over to David. Thank you very much.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming along tonight. And for me, it's a great privilege to be here. First of all, that you're here, and also I'm part of this panel of speakers. I feel immensely privileged to do that. I bring you greetings from the northeast, Newcastle, 3 hours in the north. I got on a train a little while ago and sat down, and the person beside me was a little bored and said, "What do you do?" Well, I said, I teach theology and I'm a Methodist minister these days, and I'm always a little hesitant about saying that to people because this man's eyes seemed to fill with fear as he thought to himself, oh no, 3 hours sitting beside a religious fanatic. He quickly tried to change the topic of conversation. He said, what did you do before that? Well, I said I did research in theoretical astrophysics. This time his eyes glazed as he thought to himself, what on earth does he mean by that? But he knew it was something to do with science. And so he asked me that question, how can you be a scientist and a Christian? Or, to put the subtitle with it, how can you be a scientist and a Christian with integrity? Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about theoretical astrophysics tonight. Is that all right with everyone? It's very simple. It's twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. That's basically astrophysics. The only trouble is that astrophysicists reply, up above the world so high, a contracting ball of hot hydrogen gas undergoing nuclear fusion. It doesn't quite scan in the same way as the nursery rhyme. But when I do this, people often say, well, surely, I mean, how can you talk about being a scientist and a Christian? After all, I don't know why that slide's up there at the moment. No, that's all right. I think we're having some problems with the slides. It's on my laptop. No, I'll talk anyway. Lots of people say, haven't you not heard of Stephen Hawking? Brief History of Time. This amazing book which sold over 10 million copies all around the world. Well, and have you not read the foreword in that where Carl Sagan says, this is a book about God or perhaps about the absence of God? And people say, isn't astrophysics all about the absence of God? Well, if you don't read Stephen Hawking, you could read Paul Davies. Paul Davies, another distinguished cosmologist, who in the 1980s wrote a series of books in which he said, in my opinion, science offers a surer path to God than religion. Absence of God, surer path to God. Well, let me try and talk just about, first of all, the things that make me wonder from astrophysics. Okay? And the first thing is this. Don't be too distracted at what's going on on the screen, because the first thing that I'm going to tell you is extraordinary, and it's profound. And the first thing is this. Oh, thank you very much. That was Stephen Hawking. That was Paul Davies. Let's move on. Wonder. The universe is big. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, why has Andrew brought this bloke down from Durham all the way to tell us that the universe is big? It's obvious, isn't it? But it is very big. This is one of my favorite galaxies. Here it is. It's a picture from, actually, the Hubble Space Telescope, and that little point there has been blown up to look at this galaxy. This is quite a small galaxy. It's only about 100 million stars or so. That's quite small in galaxies. But the light from that galaxy has taken over 13 billion years to reach us. That's one of the furthest objects we have ever seen. Now, the light from the sun, which occasionally comes to Newcastle, takes about 8 minutes to make its journey from the sun to Newcastle. The light from this galaxy has taken over 13 billion years. That means we're seeing that galaxy as it was 13 billion years ago. The universe is big. The successor to the Hubble Space Telescope was the James Webb Telescope. I hope some of you have seen some of the images from it. When James Webb released first images, the journal Nature said, astronomers are in awe. Well, astronomers are normally at awe, but particularly at some of these pictures. This was the first picture from released from the Webb telescope. And don't worry about these little stars in the forefront here. Look at some of these little blobs of light. So those are galaxies typically containing about 100 billion stars. How many galaxies are there in the universe? About 100 billion. I know it's late on a Friday night, but how many stars are there in the universe? All you have to do is multiply 100 billion by 100 billion, and the answer is a lot. I mean, something like the grains of sand on the beaches of the world, something like that. The second picture released from Webb was this. This is a maternity hospital for stars. It's a vast cloud of molecular hydrogen that will typically give birth to about 10,000 stars, as big as our own sun. And the third picture reminds us that in the universe we have Strictly Come Dancing, because this is a group of galaxies revolving around each other in a beautiful cosmic dance as gravity holds them together with their rotation. The universe is big. Second point, still with me? Second point, the universe is subtle. I was walking through the streets of Durham not so long ago, and a friend of mine, a fellow physicist, with tears in his eyes, came up and hugged me. This doesn't happen a lot to me. This doesn't happen a lot in Durham. This does not happen a lot with physicists. It was on the day of the announcement of the discovery of gravitational waves. Albert Einstein, 100 years previously, had said, "The space and time of the universe is a bit like a stretchy fabric," said Einstein. You can understand gravity through that, and it was a brilliant description of gravity. And Einstein said, and by the way, if two very massive objects like black holes bang into each other, what you'll get is little ripples in this stretchy space-time moving out through the universe. But he said, by the way, they'll be so small, you'll never see them. And some very clever people in this experiment called the Advanced LIGO experiment shot a laser in one direction and a laser at 90 degrees. And what they were trying to do was to see that if one of these gravitational waves from two black holes banging together on the other side of the universe came through the surface of the Earth, it might stretch the surface of the Earth just a little bit. And they saw it. They saw a gravitational wave. It stretched the Earth, the space-time by, get this, less than the diameter of a proton. That's a very small distance. And they saw it. And my friend was so overcome and hugged me, not because we had anything to do with this experiment, but because of the joy of science that something that was predicted 100 years previously, because of the universality of the laws of physics and the faithfulness of the laws of physics and the intelligibility of the laws of physics, that we could understand it, that we could do experiments like this. Einstein said, the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it's comprehensible. We can understand the universe through laws of physics. Now, just be careful a little bit, because some people say, well, isn't the universe therefore a bit like a clock? Everything's predictable. Everything's picturable. And up until the 20th century, a lot of people felt that, and they actually said, well, God can't intervene because the universe is like a mechanism, a clock. It's completely understandable. And then in the 1920s, something called quantum theory came along. We haven't got time to do quantum theory in detail tonight. Praise the Lord, some of you say. But quantum theory said that at the smallest of scales, the universe is not as predictable or picturable than you think that it is. The universe is subtle. And don't worry, I won't explain the equation for those of you who get turned off by equations. We can talk about it later if you want. Third thing is this. The universe is fruitful. One of the things in the last 20 or 30 years that's excited many of us has been the discovery of exoplanets. Planets beyond our solar system. And indeed, the fourth thing released from the Webb telescope was this graph. And what it shows is the Webb telescope looking at the atmosphere of a planet outside our solar system. And in the shape of that graph, you get evidence of water. And indeed, the whole area of exoplanets has exploded, in the sense that this next picture I downloaded last night, so it is out of date already. I'm sorry about that. So far, we have discovered 5,921 planets outside of our solar system, of which over 200 are Earth-like planets. Now, some of you will say, well, doesn't that mean that if there are so many planets outside our solar system, and you said to us 100 billion stars and 100 billion galaxies, surely there must be life out there? Well, we can come back to that in the question time, perhaps. And just remember that there is a difference between primitive life and complicated life. It's a long way from an amoeba to an accountant. Or maybe not. Who knows? The universe could be fruitful, but it is fruitful in one profound way, and I'm looking at it just now. The universe has been fruitful to produce carbon-based, intelligent, self-conscious life, you and me, due to an extraordinary series of things being, in the Goldilocks language, just right in law and circumstance. The universe is fruitful. I'm not going to prove God through that, by the way. I'm just saying it's an extraordinary thing about the universe. Fourth thing that makes me wonder, and this isn't one of the things about beauty and all the rest of it, because actually science isn't always about beauty and awe. This is the bad news, I'm afraid, that the universe is coming to an end. Now, it'll take about 20 billion years, so we're all right for tea tonight. Don't worry about that. But at the end of the 1990s, these folk, Adam Schmidt, Brian Rice, Saul Perlmutter, did some observations which showed that the universe, as it expanded, isn't going to simply get to a point where gravity takes over and starts contracting to the opposite of a big bang, a big crunch. Many of us thought it would. Or that the universe is slowing down as it expands. What they found was that the universe was speeding up. This was accelerating universe, and they got awarded the Nobel Prize just a few years ago. Now, you might say, well, that's good. The universe is going to go on forever. Trouble is, as something speeds up in its expansion, the energy gets smeared out more and more, so the universe cools to a stage where, I'm afraid, human life can no longer exist. Paul Davies, who I mentioned earlier, said this: an almost empty universe growing steadily more cold and dark for all eternity is profoundly depressing. Or Steven Weinberg, the more the universe seems comprehensible, the more it also seems pointless. So what do I as a Christian make of some of these things? I became a Christian at the age of 17, not because of science, but because I fell in love with a girl who went to the local Christian church, so I went along to that. Second, Bob Dylan, who I was really into, went through his Christian phase, and I heard about Jesus in a language I'd never heard before. And then I read the New Testament for myself. I'd never done that before. I just listened to people telling me stories. And what I found, what I was fascinated by, was in this life, death, and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth, here was the Creator God walking the pages of history. And so when I come to science, I come with this experience of relationship with Jesus as risen Lord. We can talk about that and ask questions about it and its authenticity and its evidence and its basis. But as I look at the universe and I think about a big universe, it poses the question, can God be known? The answer for me is that God has spoken in a way that I can understand in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. When I look at this subtle universe full of predictability and picturability and intelligibility and quantum theory's unpredictability, can God act? That's a huge question. But I see that God has acted in the resurrection of Jesus. A fruitful universe. What are human beings? And by the way, it's not just SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, that poses that question. I'll leave Keith and Andrew to talk a little bit more about what it means to be human. But in a God who reaches out in sacrificial love to each human being, I find what it really means to be human in relationship with Jesus. And in a universe of futility where science says it's all going to go bad, the resurrection of Jesus Christ for me says that God's not finished with this universe. There is a new heaven and a new earth, a resurrection body. Lots of people will say, well, that's all well and good. But let's go back to Stephen Hawking. An absence of God. How can you be a scientist and a Christian? Well, at one level, the two, as we've already heard beautifully put, are exploring different types of questions. To use an old illustration, what is a kiss? Well, a kiss is the approach of two pairs of lips, the reciprocal transmission of carbon dioxide and microbes, and the juxtaposition of two orbicular muscles in a state of contraction. That is a kiss. But when I see my wife tomorrow, if I go up to her and say, Alison, let me get together with you for a mutual transmission of carbon dioxide and microbes, let me juxtapose my orbicular muscle in a state of contraction with yours, she would say, get lost. Or, David's such a scientific description of the event is true, but not fully appropriate in this context. You see, in that context with my wife, there are questions of meaning, value, and purpose. When I come to the Big Bang or the origin of the universe, there is a scientific story which we work on, and we have evidence and models. But it doesn't answer every question. It doesn't answer questions of value, meaning, and purpose. There are questions then that my science asks my faith, and my faith asks my science. And we'll explore some of those a little later. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand back to Andrew.
Thank you very much, David. And as I say, you have those sheets of paper. If you haven't got a pen, there are pens at the front here. You can write a question. I said, if you do have a question, please write it before you go for your coffee and your drinks and your food, because we need time to have a look, because we want to cover as wide a field of questions as possible. I need to look at, what are the ones most people would like to ask. Keith Fox, who is going to speak next, is Emeritus Professor of Biochemistry at Southampton University with a special interest in DNA. He holds a PhD from the University of Cambridge, where he also did postdoctoral work in the Department of Pharmacology. He moved to a lectureship in Southampton and for a while was also head of the School of Biological Sciences. He served part-time for 6 years as Associate Director and then Director of the Faraday Institute for Science and Religion. That's at the University of Cambridge, until 2021, and was Interim Research Director in 2022. His research interests concern DNA structure and its recognition, and his science work has been published in over 200 papers and articles. He was Senior Executive Editor of Nucleic Acids Research from 2008 to 2021. He is a former chair and trustee of Christians in Science and is editor of Science and Christian Belief. Keith was a licensed lay minister in the Church of England for several years, was ordained deacon in June 2024, and will be ordained as a priest at the end of this month. So it is very kind that he's able to come here, because on Wednesday he goes on a retreat just before his ordination. He has a special interest in Christian apologetics, creation evolution, and bioethics and genome modification. His book with Alexander Masman, Modifying Our Genes, Theology, Science and Playing God, was published by SCM Press in 2021. I will introduce then Keith. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew, for your kind introduction. It's good to be with you this evening. I'm going to take a rather different approach to David because I'm a simple biologist or biochemist, and all this physics just leaves me cold, except a sense of awe and wonder that goes with it. So I want to take you partly on my personal journey, and I wonder if this might work. And maybe it won't, so I'll have to ask you, can you just click on the next one for me? Hold on, maybe if I switch this on. There we go, sorry. If you want to save power, you switch things off, but you've got to remember to switch them back on again, haven't you? You will have heard, and maybe our other professors here this evening will be examples of those who knew they want to be scientists from the cradle. From the moment they were at their mother's breast, they knew, I am going to be a quantum physicist. Let me tell you, that was not me. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I went to school, a good old-fashioned grammar school, where I was mediocre, to say the best. In fact, that's my school report from the age of 13 on that one. And if you look, it's an old-fashioned report. It's where they give you your grades and your position in the class. And you'll notice that I'm pretty low down in most things. I want to say a great thank you to science teachers, and one in particular, who inspired me that chemistry, and I'm sorry, chemistry is really fascinating, and also persuaded me that I could do it. Pay attention as I switch from that slide. And I wasn't doing very well because, to be honest, I was, and this is going to die again. I was bored. And in the words of the writer of Ecclesiastes, I applied my mind to wisdom to explore by means of wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is a worthless task that God has given to mortals to keep them occupied. I was bored. Nothing interested me, but one chemistry master persuaded me that chemistry really was fun and really that I could do it. I want to show you if it'll come. Go on to the next slide. Ooh, we're having fun, aren't we? Will it go to the next one? Never mind. I will tell you that on the next slide, almost all the subjects were unchanged, with the sole exception of chemistry, where I had moved from bottom of the class to top in the space of 1 year. And after that, other things for me began to fall into place. Science became really fascinating. At the same time, I should tell you that I was brought up in a Christian family. It wasn't an in-your-face Christian family. We hardly ever talked about Christian faith, but I was taken to church every Sunday and I knew the Bible stories. At roughly the same time that my fascination with science came alive, so my Christian faith started to mean something to me. It all fell into place. Now, the effect of that means that my Christian faith and my science understanding have grown together. It wasn't as I was a scientist and later became a Christian, or vice versa. They developed in me at the same time. Now, you may well say, and it's a pity I can't, we'll go back a couple of slides to where I've got Science is God's Way. There's a child's poster that says, Science is God's way of telling you that he doesn't exist. Think about that for a moment. That, for many people, is their view of, I don't know where we're going with the slides. This is just random, so maybe we'd better just ignore the slides. A child's poster that says, "Science is God's way of telling you that he doesn't exist." How can I possibly be a scientist and a Christian, a person of Christian faith? Various of the new atheists have described faith in derogatory terms. It's the great cop-out, the great excuse to evade the need to think or to evaluate evidence. Faith is belief in spite of, or maybe even perhaps again because of, the lack of evidence. Faith isn't allowed to justify itself by argument. In fact, I think some people think what I will have described as a homeopathic view of faith and evidence. You know, homeopathy, the more you dilute something, the more powerful it comes. Is the view that the less you know with any certainty, the greater the faith you have to have, and the more spiritual a person you might be. Let me tell you, that is not what I understand by faith. Faith is something called belief and trust. It's a commitment based on the facts that you've analysed, the evidence that you see in front of you. And my faith in science is based on evidence, the things that I've explored. And there's a certain degree of faith in that. I'm going to tell you something about DNA and its structure. I have never seen DNA, well, I've seen the lump that we call DNA, but the structure itself, I've never seen directly. I have faith in the instruments that tell me about those sorts of things. And yet I act on them. And the same with my Christian faith. It's based on evidence. David talked about the resurrection, and I could talk with you for some while about the evidence for that. The writer of Luke's Gospel, the physician Luke, talked about he'd undertaken to draw an account of things that had been fulfilled amongst us. He'd carefully investigated everything from the beginning and decided to write an orderly account. Investigated, searched things, found out what was going on. Christians and scientists together seek after truth. They're not competing, but they're complementary ways of seeing truth. We shouldn't be afraid of ways of analysing and seeking truth. I don't know about you, but I don't want to believe a lie. And if I am believing a lie, I want somebody to tell me that I'm believing a lie. Otherwise, my life is even more futile than the universe. Scientists have a deep sense that some things are true and others are false. There is a difference between truth and reality and imagination, a difference between fact and fantasy. I'm going to tell you a little bit about DNA, and this is why I really wish the slides were up there. How many? Yeah, okay. It is the most fascinating molecule in the universe, let me assure you. It is the only biological molecule that everybody recognizes. I can put a protein up there and you wouldn't have the faintest idea what I was talking about. Everybody recognizes that nice little structure, but it's extremely simple. Has 4 basic units to it, and they just repeat in a very precise order. Can't get more basic than that. Everybody knows about it. It's going on postage stamps. You can use it as a business marketing tool. What? And you can even buy a perfume, DNA perfume, in a nice little helical bottle, which happens to have 3 strands to it if you look very carefully, and not 2. How many times have you heard the phrase, it's in their DNA? Now, it's something that's determined in you, that you can't escape from it. Businesses use it. Preachers use it. If you are a preacher, please do not use that phrase, because it says you can't escape from it. It's inevitable. It's in the DNA. And we talk about things that we are, that determine us, that are in our DNA, whether we're gluttonous, whether we're criminals, whatever it might be. But that's an oversimplification of what genetics is all about. Let me tell you some facts about DNA. Every cell in your body has 6 billion, we're talking billions again, but not quite as many billions as David had, 6 billion of those repeating letters in every cell. And there are about 10 to the power 14, that's 1 with 14 zeros of its cells in each one of your bodies. So if you add it all together, there's enough DNA in your body to get to the sun and back 500 times. That's a long way. There's about 1% of your body weight ends up as DNA. And it's something just looked at in those numbers, I think it's a sense of awe. Your jaw drops. I can't understand it. You know, some atheists have said, well, Christians actually don't understand about awe and wonder. This is what Carl Sagan, the cosmologist, said. How is it that hardly any major religion has looked at science and concluded this is bigger than we thought? The universe is bigger than our prophet said, much grander. I'll leave the rest of the quote. I have an immense sense of awe, not just at looking up at the universe, the very big, but by looking down at the very tiny. The things that make you and me, the molecules. You know, the psalmist talked about when I consider the heavens the work of your fingers, etc., and looked up at the planets and the stars, and we now know far more than the psalmist could ever know with all our powerful telescopes. But I'd want to rewrite that and put DNA molecules within that. When I consider your molecules, the work of your fingers, the proteins that you have made, the cells declare the glory of God. Biology proclaims the work of his hands, and we are awestruck as we look at the tiny things. What does DNA do? Well, I could give you a pot of DNA. It would just look like a piece of tissue paper. Do you know the ones that have gone through the washing machine and the dryer and stood in your pocket? It would just look like that. What does it do? Well, it does everything, but it does nothing. If I put it on the bench in front of you, it would just stay there and slowly decay. And yet in the context of a cell, it is doing everything that enables your body to tick. It's amazing how sometimes scientists can get things wrong. The first structures of DNA were proposed by Linus Pauling, a Nobel Prize winner, and he got it incredibly wrong, so incredibly wrong. And I think any school child will be able to say that doesn't work. He put the phosphates, which are the charged things, in the middle. And the schoolboy knows that negative charges repel each other. It can't be like that. But of course, science is self-correcting, and now we know this wonderful structure like that. And back in 2000, we then knew the sequence of we have the structure of DNA in 1953 with James Watson and Francis Crick, and one of them said, we have discovered the secret of life. Well, I hope there are more secrets in your life than that, and more wonder than just knowing the structure of DNA. And in 2000, we had the sequencing, the first sequence of the human genome. And both Bill Clinton and Francis Collins has a deep Christian faith. He was director of the Human Genome Project at the time. Both of those, in their announcement of the sequence of the human genome, used the God word. We're learning this God's most divine and sacred gift. It's humbling and awe-inspiring to realize we've caught the first glimpse of our own instruction book, previously known only to God. I said that science is full of surprises, that the first structures of DNA were wrong. I started working in DNA about 40 years ago, I suppose, and maybe a bit more. DNA was a double helix, that famous structure that you're all too familiar with. And by the time I had finished my academic career and I'd retired, it is strange, there we go. We now know that double helix is an average. Actually, it's moving, it's dynamic, it's not a static structure. And sometimes bits of it can be 3 strands, and bits of it can be 4 strands, and even 5 strands. And it's amazing, the way in which that moves around with time. James Watson said, we used to think that our fate was in the stars. Now we know in large measure our fate is in our genes. That's an overstatement. Our genes do a lot to limit and to enable us to do things. They do not determine everything about us. Richard Dawkins, underneath that, says, "We are machines built by DNA, whose sole purpose is to make copies of the same DNA. That is exactly what we're here for. We are machines for propagating DNA, and the propagation of DNA is a self-sustaining process. It's every living object's sole reason for living." I don't know about you, but I don't feel that that's my sole purpose for living. There is more to life than just propagating my genes. But of course, DNA raises questions, as does the whole of biology. Where did it all come from? What is the origin of life? Where's the origin of DNA? It's got fantastic amounts of information stored in it. Where did that information come from? Was there a designer? Now, I don't think that proves the existence of God, but I think it gives us some clues to the kind of universe that he has made. We might ask the question as to whether life occurred naturally or it was a supernatural event. Is there a benefit in analysing that and asking how did life begin? I think it's fascinating. Did God create the whole cosmos in such a way that life would inevitably come about? We don't know. But that doesn't mean to say we shouldn't ask questions. The great thing about a scientist is they're not afraid of saying, "I don't know, but I'll go and find out." And I think the same is true for Christian faith too. There's much that I don't understand, but I'm prepared to say, "I don't know, but I'll go and find out," or I'll find somebody else who does. Charles Darwin speculated in The Origin of Species if we conceive of some warm little pond with all sorts of chemicals within it, maybe life could emerge from that. Where did life come from? And the answer is, we don't know. There are various theories as to how it could have emerged from deep sea vents, from rock formations. How could those chemicals have come together? Good bits of speculation, but we haven't, to be honest, the foggiest idea. That doesn't mean to say that God necessarily did it, but I think there's evidence for a designer in all that we look at. Darwin proposed this theory of evolution, natural selection. Fantastic theory. He had no evidence for it or how it could happen, no mechanism. Now, of course, we know from genetics and genomics, the sequences comparing different organisms. We know about the way in which we're related to other organisms. And we're 99% or 98% similar to chimpanzees, but what a difference that 2% makes. Right? We're probably 40% similar to a banana, but I think there's a tremendous difference in that. There is more to being human than having a human genome. I talked a bit about God being the creator, and maybe it relates a little bit to what David was on about, is that he didn't just set the Big Bang out and then let it tick and stand back. God is not an absentee landlord. The Christian belief says that he's immanent, he's present in the whole of creation all the time, sustaining this universe. If God should choose that, they've had enough of us now, that's the way it would be, switch off. Without God, there would be no universe. But beware. Beware of explanations that say, "I don't understand, so God must go there." It's called the God of the gaps. My belief in God isn't to explain the bits that my science cannot explain. There's a rather clever theoretical chemist, Charles Coulson, who was a devout Christian, who said, "When we come to the scientifically unknown, our correct policy is not to rejoice because we found God. It is to become better scientists." Now, don't go down the God of the gaps approach. Because actually the Christian says that we find God in what we know, not in what we don't know. God wants us to realize his presence in not in unsolved problems, but in those that are solved. And that was said by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German theologian who was martyred. The Bible points us to things that we do understand that fill us with awe and wonder of the God that we serve. And in fact, the God that we serve, we understand more about this universe, but the fact we understand about it says actually nothing as to whether God does or doesn't exist. He exists whether I understand his rules or not. Science and faith are complementary, not rival descriptions of the world. I could tell you about Frank Whittle, who invented the jet engine. The fact that we have a jet engine doesn't actually mean that Frank Whittle never existed. They're complementary. Nature is what God does, said Augustine. Or the astronomer Kepler talked about thinking God's thoughts after him. Or to take an atheist's view, a very famous one, David Attenborough. If there is an Almighty, maybe scientists are gradually uncovering his method. That's what science is about, finding something out about the universe that God has made. I'm going to skip a few. But can science answer all the questions in life? Here's, again, Francis Collins, who says that he can't fathom the fact that some people think there is a disconnect between science and faith. How can exploring what God has made possibly challenge God? It's just understanding what happened, what God has done. You see, the Christian believes that what we might describe as matter matters. There are plenty of religions where the aim is to escape from this world, to go into a spiritual state. But actually, that's not the Christian faith. The Christian faith says that God said this world is good, and it's good enough that he sent his Son, Jesus Christ, to come and live amongst us, to take on flesh, as it's put. So a deep respect for matter, and therefore science, is deeply embedded in the Christian faith. And I believe that science, then, is a gift to us from God. Enable us to explore God's amazing world, and to do so for the benefit of mankind. But does faith actually limit science? Does it stop me doing things? Science is about discovering how the world works. And the Christian has no problem with finding this out, thinking God's thoughts after him. The Christian faith does, however, say some things about what we should do with that science. Understanding how the world works is fascinating. Bring it on, tell me more. But what do we do with that knowledge? Do we use it for good or for evil? And I've been involved in some bioethical discussions. Does science have limits? Is there anything that science cannot do? Well, let me quote you a few people. Here is a geneticist, who's Stephen Jones, says science cannot answer the questions that philosophers or children ask. Why are we here? What's the point of being alive? Genetics, he says, has almost nothing to say about what it makes us more than being just machines driven by biology, about what it makes to make us human. These questions are interesting, but scientists are no more qualified to comment on them than anybody else. Questions about God, about whether there is anything other than nature to which nature owes its existence. The Nobel Prize winner Peter Medawar said, to complain that science cannot understand some things is like complaining that a railway engine cannot fly. You're just asking the wrong thing of the wrong thing. There are different ways of knowing things. David gave the example of a kiss. I'll give you the example which others have given of a boiling kettle. Why is the kettle boiling? Well, it's thermodynamics, isn't it? It's heat making molecules go faster and heating the water up. And we could go on. But the very simple reason why the kettle's boiling is because I want a cup of tea. And they're both true. They're different ways of looking at reality. So can we have a complete scientific explanation of the account of the world without mentioning God? And I would dare to say yes. In terms of how the physical world works, yes, we can. Can science answer all of life's questions? And the answer is yes, except the really interesting ones. It can't tell me how to live. It can't tell you even whether it's better to live or to die. It can't explain love, joy, or peace. There are limits to what science can achieve. As Andrew mentioned in his introduction, I was ordained a deacon a year ago, and as part of that promise was I had to complete this sentence. Do you believe, so far as you know in your heart, that God has called you to the office and work, and I want to say, of a scientist, of an accountant, even an accountant, of an artist, of a grandmother, of a shop assistant? Has God called you to that? And I, for many years, until I retired, I would say that God had called me to explore fascinating things about the world around me and to make, hopefully, some things of benefit to mankind. It is great fun being a scientist. The astronomer Kepler, for a while, wanted to be a theologian, a vicar, a priest, and he was declined that. And he came to realize that God was, through his efforts as an astronomer, God was being celebrated in astronomy. You don't have to be a profound theologian. It is great fun being a scientist. It is even greater fun being a scientist and a Christian. Here's a quote from two colleagues of mine at the Faraday Institute who said, "We are immensely grateful for the sheer fun of being able to study a created world that reflects God's plans and actions. The unexpected joy of suddenly understanding some small corner of God's world better is hard to beat. God allows us to participate in his creation and in discovering it." And as I would say to my students as they went to do research projects, I'd say, when you're doing a research project, you will find something out that nobody in the 13.8 billion years of the universe has ever known before. It is a wonderful experience being a scientist. And it's a great privilege being a scientist and a Christian. Here is Francis Collins again. "I think scientists, believers, are the most fortunate. We have the opportunity to explore the natural world at a time in history where mysteries are being revealed almost on a daily basis. We have the opportunity to perceive the unraveling of those mysteries in a special perspective that is an uncovering of God's grandeur." And his final words there, I think, took me by surprise when I first read them. This is a particularly wonderful form of worship. It's giving credit to the God who made it all. My final slide will introduce two people, one of whom you'll be very familiar with. The one on the right is called Albert Einstein. The one on the left, I wonder if how many people know who that might be, is Georges Lemaitre, who was a Catholic priest. And he was the first one to propose what he called the primeval atom, the Big Bang. He thought of that before many of the other cosmologists. He was a cosmologist. And I close with a phrase of his. He said, "There are two ways of arriving at the truth, science and faith. I decided to follow them both." Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. That is incredible. So what we're going to do, I just actually make a comment. So much about Francis Collins. You had an introduction. I spent some time at Yale University. And while I was there, I had the opportunity to meet and speak a long time with Francis Collins. And he wrote a wonderful book called The Language of God. And I really recommend it to you because he was the director of the Genome Project to look at human DNA. And yet he's a wonderful Christian. And he talks about his both scientific and his religious journey in that book. It is truly a wonderful book that I recommend to you. So I hope you'll think about if there's any questions you would like to put to any three of us in either biological sciences, physical sciences, earth sciences, you're welcome. But I would ask that you use one of the sheets of paper. You can write, there are pens along the bottom here, and if when you've done that, put in the bottom basket down here, I'll have a look at those and we'll try and get a good range of questions to discuss between us. So thank you. You can go now to, if you need the loo, you've been told where that is, or there's tea, coffee, and nibbles and stuff at the back. So please come back in about 20 minutes and we'll have our little panel discussion trying to answer some of your questions. Thank you very much.